When a human dreadnought descended from the stars, the alien armada learned why you should never corner a species with nothing left to lose. Because desperation doesn't just breed innovation, it breeds devastation. The orbital defense platforms around Arcturus Prime were dying, one by one. Their brilliant flares of defiance winked out against the black canvas of space, snuffed like candles in a storm. Admiral Kresh of the Valorian Confederacy watched from the bridge of his flagship, the Undaunted Pride, as another human station erupted in a cascade of debris and frozen atmosphere. His mandibles clicked in satisfaction, the sound echoing through the command center where his officers worked with cold efficiency. 17 minutes until the planetary shields collapse, reported his tactical officer, a younger Valorian whose carapace still bore the deep purple of youth. The humans are throwing everything they have at our lines, but their ammunition reserves are depleting rapidly. It's almost pathetic how they continue to resist. Kresh allowed himself a moment of triumph. Arcturus Prime was humanity's breadbasket, a terraformed jewel that fed a dozen colony worlds. Its fall would cripple the human war effort and demonstrate once and for all the superiority of the Confederacy's military doctrine. The humans had been arrogant, expanding too quickly, claiming worlds that rightfully belonged to older, wiser species. This war was meant to teach them humility, to show them their place in the galactic order. They fight like cornered animals, Kresh observed, watching the tactical display as human fighters made suicidal runs against his capital ships. Brave perhaps, but ultimately futile. Evolution has not prepared them for systematic warfare against a truly advanced civilization. The Valorian Confederacy had been fighting wars for 3,000 years. They had conquered 17 species, absorbed their territories, and established an empire that stretched across 4 spiral arms. Humanity, by comparison, had barely left their nursery world 2 centuries ago. They were children playing at war, and this battle was their education. Another defensive platform exploded, its reactor going critical in a miniature supernova. Kresh counted the seconds until the shields would fail. Soon his bombardment fleet would reduce the surface installations to molten slag, and the 2 billion humans on Arcturus Prime would have no choice but to surrender or die. He preferred surrender. Prisoners were useful for labor, and humanity's biological adaptability made them excellent workers in hostile environments. Admiral, his communications officer interrupted, her antennae twitching with uncertainty. We're receiving a transmission from the human command center on the surface. They're requesting a ceasefire to discuss terms of surrender. Kresh's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his species. How long until shield collapse? 14 minutes, sir. Then we wait 13 minutes before responding, Kresh decided. Let them sweat. Let them understand that mercy is granted by the victorious, not negotiated among equals. Continue the bombardment. The human fighters continued their desperate assault, but their numbers were dwindling. Kresh watched as a squadron of 6 human interceptors dove toward one of his cruisers, their energy weapons carving superficial gouges in the ablative armor before point defense lasers cut them down. Not a single one escaped. They died without accomplishing anything of strategic value, throwing away lives in meaningless gestures of defiance. The humans have a saying, Kresh mused to his second-in-command. Something about going down with one ship. I never understood that philosophy. A wise commander preserves his forces, retreats when necessary, lives to fight another day. These humans would rather die than accept defeat. It's wasteful. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Thros, clicked his agreement. They lack discipline, Admiral. They fight with emotion rather than logic. It makes them unpredictable but ultimately ineffective against a properly organized battle line. The tactical display updated, showing the human defense grid in its death throes. Only 3 platforms remained operational, and they were concentrating their fire in a futile attempt to protect the shield generators on the planet's surface. It was textbook desperation, the kind of last stand that military academies studied as examples of what not to do when facing overwhelming odds. 10 minutes to shield collapse, the tactical officer reported. The humans are pulling back their remaining fighters. They're forming up behind their last 3 platforms in a defensive formation. Kresh leaned forward, studying the display. They're protecting something. What do our sensors show? Nothing unusual, Admiral. Standard retreat pattern, probably trying to preserve their remaining craft for weight. The tactical officer's voice changed, acquiring a sharp edge. Sir, we're detecting a gravity anomaly. Something massive just entered the system at the edge of our sensor range. Details, Kresh demanded. Unknown contact bearing 270 Mark 15. Mass displacement suggests a capital ship, possibly Dreadnought class. Signature doesn't match any known human vessel in our database. It's accelerating toward us. Current velocity exceeds anything we've seen from human propulsion technology. Kresh felt a flutter of unease in his primary stomach. Show me. The main view screen shifted, magnifying the distant contact. At first it was just a blur, a distortion against the stars. Then the computer enhanced the image and Kresh saw it clearly for the first time. It was a human ship, but unlike any human ship the Confederacy had encountered. Where human vessels typically followed the efficient, geometric designs common throughout the galaxy's cylindrical hulls with modular construction, this ship was something else entirely. It was massive, easily twice the size of his flagship, and its design spoke of a philosophy entirely foreign to conventional naval architecture. The hull was angular, aggressive, studded with what appeared to be hundreds of weapon emplacements. Armor plating overlapped in layers, giving it the appearance of some ancient predator's hide. Heat radiators glowed cherry red along its flanks, suggesting power generation on a scale that should have been impossible for a ship of that size. And strangest of all, painted across its prow in letters large enough to be seen from thousands of kilometers away, was a name in human script, UNSS Retribution. Get me a full sensor sweep, Kresh ordered, his voice steady despite the growing tension on the bridge. I want to know everything about that ship. Armament, shield strength, power signatures, everything. The seconds stretched as his sensor operators worked frantically. Finally, the tactical officer spoke, and there was fear in her voice, fear that Kresh had never heard from a Valorian officer in combat. Admiral, the readings, they don't make sense. Power output suggests a reactor core 3 times the size of what should fit in that hull. We're detecting energy signatures consistent with weapons we've never seen before. And sir, the ship's acceleration profile suggests it has some kind of inertial dampening technology far beyond what humanity should possess. At its current rate, it will reach engagement range in 8 minutes. Impossible, Thross muttered. Our intelligence reports indicated humanity's most advanced warship was the Enterprise class, and we've destroyed 2 of those already. They don't have the industrial capacity to build something like this, not while fighting a war on 6 fronts. But the evidence was there on the display, undeniable and approaching fast. The UNSS Retribution carved through the void like a falling star, its approach marked by a trail of ionized particles in bent space-time. On the bridge of the undaunted Pride, Admiral Kresh watched its approach with growing apprehension. He had fought in 37 major engagements over his career, faced down fleets and conquered worlds, but something about this single ship filled him with a primal unease that his logical mind couldn't explain. Admiral, incoming transmission, his communications officer announced. It's from the unknown vessel. Audio only. They're broadcasting on all channels. They want everyone to hear this. Put it through, Kresh ordered. The bridge speakers crackled, and then a human voice filled the command center. It was male, deep, and possessed of an absolute confidence that bordered on arrogance. But there was something else beneath it, something cold and implacable that made Kresh's hackles rise. Valorian Fleet, this is Captain Marcus Chen of the United Nations Starship Retribution. You are hereby ordered to cease your bombardment of Arcturus Prime and withdraw from this system immediately. You have 5 minutes to comply. Kresh's mandibles clicked in amusement, though the sound was hollow. This is Admiral Kresh of the Valorian Confederacy. We have 300 vessels in this system, human. You have one. Your bravado is noted, but your mathematics are poor. Withdraw now and we will allow you to escape. Stay and we will add your ship to the debris field. There was a pause, and when the human spoke again, there was something that might have been pity in his voice. Admiral, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you of a fact. The Retribution was built for one purpose, to respond to situations exactly like this one. We weren't sent to negotiate, and we weren't sent to participate in a fair fight. We were sent to end this siege, and that's exactly what we're going to do. You have 4 minutes. Kresh cut the transmission with a sharp gesture. Battle stations. All ships, target that vessel. I want every gun we have trained on it the moment it enters range. Thross, coordinate with our carrier groups. Send every fighter we have. That ship may be large, but nothing can withstand concentrated fire from an entire fleet. The Valorian armada began to shift, 300 warships turning in unison like a school of predatory fish sensing prey. Carriers began launching fighters, adding another 1,000 small craft to the defensive screen. It was enough firepower to reduce a small moon to dust, all of it focused on one approaching vessel. 3 minutes to optimal firing range, the tactical officer reported. The human ship is still accelerating. Admiral, its shields are powering up. The energy readings they're off the scale. I've never seen shield emissions like this. Fire as soon as it enters range, Kresh ordered. I want that ship disabled before it can deploy whatever weapons it's carrying. The Retribution continued its approach, seeming to grow larger with each passing second. Now Kresh could see details on its hull the battle scars it already bore, suggesting this wasn't its first engagement. Blast marks and repaired armor plating told the story of a ship that had seen hard combat and survived. Whatever this vessel was, it had been tested before. 2 minutes. The tactical officer counted down. Fighters are moving to intercept. Kresh watched as the cloud of Valorian fighters swept forward to meet the human ship. Standard doctrine overwhelmed the target with superior numbers, strike at weak points, cripple its engines and weapons before the capital ships closed in. The fighters reached engagement range, their weapons lighting up the darkness as they opened fire. And then, something extraordinary happened. The space around the Retribution erupted in a lattice of brilliant blue energy, not a conventional shield, but something else entirely. The fighter weapons struck this barrier and simply vanished, their energy absorbed and dissipated without even causing the shield to flicker. And then the ship's point defense systems activated. What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the Confederacy as the most devastating display of defensive firepower ever recorded. The Retribution bristled with weapons, not the large gun emplacements Kresh had expected, but thousands of smaller turrets, each one tracking targets with inhuman precision. They opened fire simultaneously. The Valorian fighters didn't stand a chance. The point defense network created a kill zone extending 500 kilometers in every direction, a sphere of death that no small craft could penetrate. Fighters exploded by the dozen, then by the 100, their pilots never even getting close enough to threaten the human ship. In less than 30 seconds, 1,000 fighters were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. By the ancestors, Thros breathed, his usual composure shattered. How is this possible? All ships fire! Kresh roared, abandoning strategy in favor of raw firepower. Pour everything into that ship! The Valorian fleet opened up with their main batteries, and space itself seemed to tear apart under the onslaught. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, plasma torpedoes, 300 ships firing in concert, more destructive power than most civilizations possessed in their entire navies. The combined firepower struck the Retribution's shields in a sustained barrage that should have vaporized any ship ever built. The blue energy shield flared brilliant white, absorbing the incredible energy being pumped into it. For a moment, Kresh dared to hope. No shield could withstand that kind of punishment indefinitely. The human ship would either have to retreat or die. But the Retribution didn't retreat. It didn't even slow down. Instead, the human warship did something that violated every principle of naval combat that Admiral Kresh had learned in his 40 years of service. It accelerated directly into the teeth of the Valorian bombardment, pushing through the storm of fire like a swimmer diving into an ocean wave. Shields holding at 97%, the tactical officer reported, her voice climbing with panic. Admiral, they're not even trying to evade. They're coming straight at us. Kresh watched in growing horror as the Retribution closed the distance. Its shields continued to blaze with absorbed energy, but they showed no signs of failing. Worse, the ship was beginning to return fire. The first indication came when ports opened along the Retribution's forward hull, revealing weapons that Kresh immediately recognized and feared. They were mass drivers, but scaled up to a size that should have been impossible. Each barrel was large enough to fire projectiles the size of a ground transport vehicle, and there were dozens of them. Evasive maneuvers. Kresh shouted, but he knew it was already too late. The mass drivers fired with a sound that transcended the vacuum, a deep, resonant thrum that somehow reached through the hull of every ship in the fleet, felt more than heard. Solid slugs of depleted uranium and tungsten, each one weighing several tons and traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, streaked across the space between the fleets. The first salvo hit 6 Valorian cruisers. The kinetic energy was so enormous that shields meant nothing. The projectiles punched through energy barriers like they weren't even there. smashed through armor plating designed to withstand nuclear detonations, and created catastrophic structural failures that tore the ships apart from the inside out. 6 warships' combined crew of nearly 4,000 Valorians simply ceased to exist in the span of 3 seconds. "Return fire. All ships concentrate fire on that vessel," Kresh ordered, but he could hear the desperation in his own voice. The Valorian fleet poured more fire into the approaching human ship, and finally, they began to see results. The Retribution's shields were weakening, dropping from 97% to 92%, then to 88%. It was still far from destroyed, but at least they were damaging it. Then the human ship's main guns spoke. They emerged from the ship's spine, rising from armored bays that had been concealed until this moment. They were unlike anything in the Confederacy's weapon database, massive energy cannons that seemed to draw power directly from the ship's main reactor. When they fired, the entire vessel shuddered from the recoil, despite its massive size and advanced inertial dampening. The beams that lanced out were not the clean, focused energy weapons that the Valorians used. These were something else: coherent streams of what appeared to be superheated plasma, contained and directed by magnetic fields so powerful they distorted the fabric of space around them. Where they struck, matter simply ceased to exist. The undaunted Pride shuddered as one of those beams grazed its port side, shearing off 30 meters of armor plating and everything behind it. Kresh was thrown from his command chair as the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel, and emergency bulkheads slammed shut to seal off the venting sections. "Damage report," Kresh demanded, pulling himself back to his feet. "Port armor compromised, decks 7 through 12 exposed to vacuum. We've lost 300 crew, and secondary weapons are offline. Admiral, the beam just cut through our armor like it was paper." Kresh looked at the tactical display and felt his heart sink. The Retribution had carved a path of destruction through his fleet, and it hadn't even slowed down. 17 ships destroyed, another dozen crippled and drifting, and the human ship's shields were regenerating, climbing back up to 95% even as his fleet continued to pound them with everything they had. "How?" Thros asked, staring at the display in disbelief. "How do they have this kind of technology?" "Our intelligence said." "Our intelligence was wrong," Kresh interrupted bitterly. "Or perhaps the humans lied. Or perhaps this ship represents something new, something they've been developing in secret." He activated the fleet-wide channel. "All ships coordinate fire patterns. Target the same section of their shield matrix. We need to create a breakthrough point." It was sound tactics, the kind of fleet coordination that had won the Confederacy countless victories. 300 ships began to synchronize their weapons, focusing their fire on a single point of the Retribution's forward shields. It should have worked. The concentrated energy should have overwhelmed even those impossible shields and allowed them to strike at the hull beneath. But Captain Chen had been expecting that. The Retribution rolled, a maneuver that should have been impossible for a ship of its size, presenting fresh shield sections to the concentrated fire while repositioning its weapons, and then it launched missiles. They came in swarms, hundreds of them, each one accelerating at rates that suggested gravitic propulsion rather than conventional rockets. The Valorian point defense network lit up, trying to shoot them down, but there were too many. They wove through the defensive fire with an agility that suggested active AI guidance, adapting their approach vectors in real time to avoid interception. The first wave struck home, and Kresh realized these weren't conventional explosives. Each missile carried what appeared to be a miniaturized fusion warhead, and they detonated in carefully coordinated patterns designed to maximize damage to multiple ships simultaneously. The combined effect was devastating. Fusion fires bloomed throughout the Valorian formation, and ships that survived the initial detonations found their shields stripped away and their armor superheated to the point of failure. "Fleet cohesion is breaking down," the tactical officer reported, no longer trying to hide her fear. 31 ships destroyed, 18 more have lost primary systems. "Admiral, we need to withdraw." "No!" Kresh slammed his fist on his command console. "We are the Valorian Confederacy. We have never retreated from a single enemy vessel. All ships close to point-blank range. If we can get inside their shield envelope." But he never finished the order. The Retribution activated a weapon system that the Valorians hadn't even known existed. Along its flanks, panels retracted to reveal what could only be described as force projectors devices. that generated localized gravity fields so intense they could crush steel like paper. The ship had essentially turned itself into a mobile singularity generator, and now it demonstrated why that was so terrifying. 3. Valorian destroyers that had closed to what they thought was effective range suddenly found themselves caught in gravitational shear forces that their structural integrity fields couldn't compensate for. Metal screamed and buckled as the ships were literally torn apart by tidal forces, their crews dying instantly as the vessels crumpled like aluminum cans in a hydraulic press. "They're monsters," someone on the bridge whispered, and for the first time in his career, Kresh didn't reprimand the speaker. Because it was true. The humans had built a ship that didn't just fight, it dominated, overwhelmed, crushed. It was a vessel designed not for war but for annihilation. The Retribution was among them now, moving through the Valorian formation like a shark through a school of fish. Its weapons fired in all directions simultaneously, each gun independently targeted by what must have been an incredibly sophisticated combat AI. Ships exploded, burned, broke apart. The carefully organized Valorian fleet was disintegrating into chaos, and there was nothing Kresh could do to stop it. "Admiral, we're receiving another transmission from the human ship," the communications officer said. Kresh almost didn't answer. What was the point? But perhaps the human wanted to accept his surrender, to show mercy. Perhaps there was a way out of this nightmare that didn't end with the total destruction of his fleet. "Put it through," he said quietly. Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge again, but this time it wasn't confident or cold. It was sad, heavy with a weariness that Kresh recognized the voice of a soldier who had seen too much death and was tired of dealing it out. "Admiral Kresh, you were warned. You had 5 minutes to withdraw and you chose to fight. You told me my mathematics were poor, that I was one ship against 300. But here's what you didn't understand about humanity, about why we built ships like the Retribution." Kresh said nothing, watching as another of his cruisers died on the tactical display. Chen continued, "We don't fight fair. We don't believe in honor among equals on the battlefield, because on the battlefield we're not looking for equals, we're looking to win. You've been waging this war against us for 3 years, destroying our colonies, killing our civilians, teaching us lessons about humility and our place in the galaxy. Well, Admiral, we've learned that the galaxy is full of predators, and that if we want to survive we need to become something that predators fear." "You're winning," Kresh said bitterly. "Is this speech necessary, or are you simply savoring your victory?" "Neither," Chen replied. "I'm explaining why I'm about to give you one last chance, even though you don't deserve it." "Stand down, Admiral. Order your ships to power down their weapons and withdraw. Take your survivors and leave the system. If you do that in the next 60 seconds, I'll let you go." Kresh looked at his tactical display. He had started this battle with 300 ships. Now he had less than 200 still combat capable, and that number was dropping every second the Retribution continued its rampage through his formation. Pride demanded that he fight to the last, that he show the humans that the Valorian Confederacy would never surrender. But he was also responsible for the lives of nearly 200,000 crew members, and he could see now that continuing this fight would be nothing but murder. The Retribution was still at 70% shield strength, still had full weapons capability, and showed no signs of running out of ammunition or power. His fleet, by contrast, was broken and bleeding. 45 seconds, Admiral, Chen said quietly. Kresh made the hardest decision of his life. All ships stand down. Power down weapons and prepare for withdrawal. He paused, then added, "This is Admiral Kresh. I am officially ordering a full retreat from the Arcturus system." The bridge was silent except for the soft beeps and chirps of the various monitoring stations. Slowly, painfully, the Valorian ships began to power down their weapons and disengage from the battle. The Retribution continued to track them with its guns, but it held its fire, allowing them to withdraw. "Transmission from the surface," the communications officer said. "The humans are thanking us for the mercy of leaving." Kresh almost laughed at that. Mercy. They had come here to conquer, to demonstrate their superiority, and they were being thanked for having the mercy to run away after being beaten by a single ship. "One more thing, Admiral," Chen's voice came through the speakers one last time. "I need you to understand something. The Retribution isn't unique. We're building more. 5 more ships of this class will be operational within 6 months. By this time next year we'll have 20. Tell your superiors that. Tell them that humanity is done being pushed around. Done losing colonies. Done watching our people die because the older races think we don't deserve our place among the stars. Crash listened, understanding the message being sent not just to him, but to the entire Confederacy through him. We didn't want this war, Chen continued. But since you gave it to us, we're going to finish it. You wanted to teach us humility, Admiral? Instead, you taught us to build weapons like this. You taught us that the only thing that matters in the galaxy is strength, and that mercy is something the weak beg for, and the strong grant. Well, we're not weak anymore, and we're not begging. The transmission ended. The undaunted Pride limped away from Arcturus Prime at the head of what remained of the Valorian fleet. Behind them, the Retribution maintained its position over the planet, a silent guardian standing watch as the defeated Confederacy forces retreated to the edge of the system and engaged their faster-than-light drives. Crash sat in his command chair, staring at nothing. Around him, his bridge crew worked in silence, tending to damaged systems and compiling casualty reports. The numbers were catastrophic: 147 ships destroyed, another 60 damaged so badly they would need months of repairs. More than 90,000 Valorians dead, all at the hands of a single human vessel. Admiral, Thros approached cautiously, his carapace bearing fresh scorch marks from an electrical fire that had broken out during the battle. We need to discuss our report to the High Command. They'll want to know what happened here. What happened here is that we learned humanity has been hiding the true extent of their technological capabilities. Crash said flatly. That ship, it represents a quantum leap beyond anything we've encountered from them before. The questions are, how did they develop such technology so quickly, and how many more surprises are they hiding? Thros nodded slowly. The humans claimed they're building more ships of that class. If that's true, if they can field even a handful of vessels like the Retribution, it would fundamentally alter the strategic balance of this entire war. Crash pulled up the sensor logs from the battle, reviewing the footage of the Retribution cutting through his fleet like a knife through flesh. He examined the weapon signatures, the shield modulations, the power readings. Everything about that ship spoke of a level of engineering sophistication that humans simply shouldn't have possessed. Send a priority signal to High Command, Crash ordered. Full data dump from this engagement. Include my recommendation that we immediately pursue diplomatic channels to end this conflict. If humanity can build one ship like that, they can build dozens. And if they can build dozens, he didn't need to finish the sentence. If humanity could field a fleet of ships like the Retribution, the Valorian Confederacy would face a threat unlike anything they had encountered in 3,000 years of expansion. The hunters had found something that refused to be prey, something that bit back hard enough to draw blood. Meanwhile, on the surface of Arcturus Prime, the 2 billion colonists who had been preparing to die were instead celebrating their salvation. In the cities below, people poured into the streets, pointing up at the stars where the massive silhouette of their rescuer hung in orbit. The Retribution had become a symbol in the span of a single battle, proof that humanity would not abandon its people, that help would come no matter how dire the situation. But aboard the Retribution itself, the mood was far from celebratory. Captain Marcus Chen stood on his bridge, watching the last of the Valorian ships vanish into faster-than-light transit. Around him, his crew was securing from battle stations, tending to minor injuries and stress casualties. The battle had been one-sided, but it had still extracted a toll on his people. Humans weren't designed to fight at the level of intensity the Retribution demanded of them. Casualty report, Chen requested from his executive officer, Commander Sarah Okonkwo, 17 injuries, mostly from equipment malfunctions and stress-related incidents during high-G maneuvers. Okonkwo reported. No fatalities. Shields held at minimum 68% throughout the engagement. Ammunition reserves are at 72%. Main reactor is running hot but within acceptable parameters. Overall, sir, we performed exactly as designed. Chen nodded slowly, but there was no satisfaction in the gesture. And the Valorians? Best estimates put their casualties at over 90,000 killed, with another 40,000 injured. We destroyed nearly half their fleet, Captain. It was a massacre. It was a message, Chen corrected, though his voice was heavy. Those ships, those 90,000 Valorians, they died because their admiralty thought humans were weak, thought we could be bullied and conquered. We had to show them that wasn't true. We had to make it so painful, so undeniable, that they'd have no choice but to report back to their superiors that humanity is not to be trifled with. Okonkwo was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think it will work, sir? Will they seek peace now?" Chen turned to look at her and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, not physical tiredness, but the deeper weariness that came from carrying the weight of command, from making decisions that resulted in thousands of deaths. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's the hell of it, Sarah. We built this ship, we gave it weapons that can tear apart fleets, and we still don't know if it will be enough. Because the truth is, peace isn't won through superior firepower alone. It's won when both sides decide that continuing to fight costs more than they're willing to pay. All we can do is make that cost as clear as possible and hope they're rational enough to accept it." He gestured at the view screen, where Arcturus Prime rotated peacefully below them, its blue-green surface unmarred by the orbital battle that had raged above it. 2 billion people down there were going to die today. Children, families, scientists, artists, farmers, all of them about to be slaughtered or enslaved because the Valorian Confederacy decided humanity needed to be taught a lesson. We stopped that from happening. Whatever moral weight we have to carry because of the Valorians we killed, I'll bear it, because those 2 billion lives are worth it. The news of what happened at Arcturus Prime spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The Valorian Confederacy, humiliated and shocked, initially tried to suppress the details of the battle, but you can't hide the disappearance of 147 warships. You can't explain away 90,000 casualties with bureaucratic euphemisms, and you certainly can't hide from the countless sensor recordings and communications logs that had been transmitted throughout the fleet, recordings that inevitably leaked to the wider galactic community. Within a week, every major power in known space had obtained copies of the battle footage. They watched in stunned silence as a single human vessel tore apart a fleet that should have overwhelmed it. Military analysts pored over every second of the engagement, trying to understand how humanity had made such an enormous technological leap in such a short time. The truth, which humanity's leadership took great pains to obscure, was that the retribution represented not a sudden breakthrough, but the culmination of a crash program that had begun the moment the Valorians had first fired on human colonies. For 3 years, while humanity had appeared to be losing the war, the greatest scientific and engineering minds of Earth and her colonies had been working in secret, developing weapons and technologies that pushed the absolute boundaries of known physics. The retribution had cost more to build than all of humanity's previous military spending combined. Its reactor was a barely contained fusion of human ingenuity and calculated risk, pushing matter-antimatter reactions to the edge of stability. Its weapons were designed with a singular purpose: to kill ships as efficiently as possible, with no thought given to elegance or unnecessary capability. Its shields used principles that humanity had discovered by accident while studying the wreckage of destroyed alien vessels, adapted and amplified to levels that even their creators found frightening. It was a ship built by a species that had its back against the wall, that faced extinction if it failed. And that desperation had given birth to something that the older, more established races of the galaxy found deeply unsettling. Ambassador Tereth of the Kalian Union, one of the galaxy's major neutral powers, met with the human delegation 2 weeks after the Battle of Arcturus Prime. The meeting took place on Kalia's homeworld, in the grand diplomatic chambers that had hosted treaty negotiations for 600 years. "You've frightened them," Tereth said without preamble, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. "The Valorians, yes, but also everyone else who saw what your ship did. The Confederacy had 300 vessels, and you destroyed nearly half of them with a single ship. Do you understand how that appears to the rest of us?" Ambassador Liu Wei, humanity's chief diplomat, met Tereth's faceted gaze calmly. "It appears exactly as we intended it to appear, Ambassador Tereth. It appears that humanity is no longer a convenient target, that we have the capacity to defend ourselves and exact a terrible price from anyone who attacks us. It appears that you have the capacity for genocide," Tereth countered sharply. "One ship, Ambassador Liu, one ship did that. How many ships do you have? How many more are you building? What's to stop humanity from deciding that, having been victimized, you now have the right to victimize others?" Liu Wei was quiet for a moment, considering her response carefully. This was the delicate balance humanity now had to walk, appearing strong enough that others wouldn't attack, but not so powerful that they would be seen as a threat that needed to be preemptively eliminated. "The Retribution is not a ship of conquest," she said finally. "It's a ship of deterrence. Yes, we're building more. Yes, we have the capacity to build a fleet that could challenge any power in the galaxy. But we have no interest in expansion through force, no desire to build an empire. We want what we've always wanted, to live in peace, to explore, to grow. The Valorians denied us that. They forced us to become something we never wanted to be. And what is that? Tereth asked. Dangerous, Lu Wei replied simply. We never wanted to be the species that others feared. But if that's what it takes to ensure our survival, if that's what it takes to protect our children and our future, then so be it. We'll be dangerous. We'll be terrifying if we must, but we'll be alive. Tereth's form shimmered, a Kalian expression of contemplation. The Valorian High Command has reached out through back channels. They're interested in discussing a ceasefire. Lu Wei allowed herself a small smile. I'm aware. We've received similar overtures. But we're not interested in a ceasefire, Ambassador Tereth. We're interested in a comprehensive peace treaty, one that includes reparations for the colonies they destroyed, formal recognition of humanity's territorial claims, and most importantly, a mutual defense pact that ensures this never happens again. You're asking for a great deal from a proud species that has never surrendered, Tereth observed. They didn't surrender, Lu Wei corrected. They retreated. There's a difference, and we're all aware of it. But here's the reality, Ambassador. The Valorians can choose to accept peace on reasonable terms now, or they can choose to continue fighting until we have a dozen ships like the Retribution, and decide the terms ourselves. I know which option I'd prefer if I were them. Tereth shifted, her crystalline body rearranging itself in a gesture of unease. You speak of peace, but your words carry the weight of ultimatums. The galaxy has maintained a certain equilibrium for centuries. The older races have established territories, agreed upon boundaries, protocols for conflict resolution. Humanity is disrupting all of that. The equilibrium you describe is one where species like the Valorians could attack us with impunity, Lu Wei said, her voice hardening, where humanity was expected to accept our role as newcomers, to be grateful for whatever scraps of territory the established powers allowed us to keep. That equilibrium, Ambassador, was built on humanity's weakness. It shouldn't surprise anyone that we have no interest in maintaining it. The meeting continued for hours, but the fundamental positions remained unchanged. Humanity had irrevocably altered the galactic balance of power, and the older races were scrambling to understand what that meant for the future. 3 months after the Battle of Arcturus Prime, Captain Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the Retribution, watching as the second ship of her class, the UNSS Vengeance, completed its final construction phase at the orbital shipyards above Earth. The massive vessel was nearly identical to his own command, a twin engine of destruction ready to enforce humanity's newfound position in the galaxy. Beautiful, isn't she? Commander Okonkwo said, joining him at the viewport. Chen didn't answer immediately. Beautiful wasn't the word he would have chosen. Powerful, certainly. Terrifying, absolutely. But beautiful? These ships were instruments of war, built to kill efficiently and without mercy. There was no beauty in that, even if there was a certain terrible elegance in their design. 3 more are under construction, Okonkwo continued, seeming not to notice his silence. They're saying we'll have a full squadron of 6 within the year, and 20 by the end of next year. Just like you told Admiral Kresh, the Valorians are going to have nightmares about these ships for generations. They already do, Chen said quietly. I've been reading the intelligence reports. The Valorian military is in chaos. Half their admiralty wants to sue for peace immediately, afraid that we'll launch a retaliatory campaign into their territory. The other half wants to double down, to strike at Earth before we can build more ships like this one. They're tearing themselves apart from the inside. Good, Okonkwo said with satisfaction. They started this war. They destroyed Port Reliance, killed 60,000 colonists who never raised a weapon against anyone. They bombarded New Shanghai from orbit, turned a thriving city into a crater, let them tear themselves apart. Let them feel what fear tastes like. Chen turned to look at his executive officer, seeing the anger still burning in her eyes. Okonkwo had lost family at New Shanghai, a sister, 2 nephews, and a niece. The Valorian bombardment had given her a personal stake in this war that went beyond professional duty. Sarah, he said gently, we need to be careful that our desire for justice doesn't become a thirst for vengeance. Yes, the Valorians need to pay for what they've done. Yes, they need to understand that there are consequences for attacking humanity. But if we become the monsters they claimed we were, If we let our anger drive us to commit the same atrocities they did, then what have we accomplished? Okonkwo was silent for a long moment, staring out at the vengeance. Do you ever wonder if we've already crossed that line? 90,000 Valorians dead, Captain. 90,000 beings who probably had families, loved ones, lives they wanted to return to. We killed them in less than an hour. Doesn't that make us monsters? I don't know, Chen admitted, and the honesty of it hung heavy between them. I think about it every day. Every time I close my eyes, I see those ships breaking apart, and I know that each one of those explosions represents hundreds or thousands of lives ending. Lives I ended because I gave the orders. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But then I think about Arcturus Prime. 2 billion people who are alive right now because we did what we did. Children who will grow up, have families of their own, contribute to humanity's future. And I think about all the other colonies that would have fallen if we hadn't demonstrated our strength at Arcturus. How many humans are alive right now who would be dead if we'd let the Valorians win that day? So the math justifies it? Okonkwo asked. 2 billion saved versus 90,000 killed. Therefore it was the right decision? No, Chen shook his head. The math doesn't justify anything. There's no mathematical equation that can make taking 90,000 lives morally acceptable. But that's the burden of command, Sarah. We don't get to make choices between good and evil. We get to make choices between terrible and catastrophic, and then we have to live with the consequences. A notification chimed on Chen's personal communicator. He glanced at it and sighed. Orders from Fleet Command. We're being deployed to the Kepler sector. Intelligence suggests the Valorians are massing forces there, possibly planning to strike at our mining operations on Kepler 442b. Another message that needs sending? Okonkwo asked. Looks like it, Chen confirmed. Though this time hopefully we won't need to fire a shot. With luck, the Valorians will see us coming and decide that discretion is the better part of valor. And if they don't, Chen's expression hardened. Then we remind them why they should have. The Valorian task force at Kepler 442b was smaller than the fleet at Arcturus, only 70 ships, but still a formidable force. They had been positioned there for 2 weeks, blockading the mining colony and demanding its surrender. The 15,000 human miners and their families were running low on supplies, and the situation was becoming desperate. When the retribution emerged from faster-than-light transit at the edge of the system, the Valorian response was immediate and telling. They powered down their weapons and requested a parley. Admiral Kresh himself was there, in command of the task force. He had specifically requested the assignment after recovering from his wounds at Arcturus Prime, and Chen understood why. The Valorian commander wanted to face the ship that had destroyed his fleet, to understand the enemy that had beaten him so thoroughly. The parley took place via holographic communication, the two commanders facing each other across the light years. Kresh looked older than he had 3 months ago, Chen noticed. The defeat had aged him, added a weariness to his features that spoke of sleepless nights and hard questions without easy answers. Captain Chen, Kresh began, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless English. I requested this communication because I wanted to tell you something before any more blood is spilled. I'm listening, Admiral, Chen replied. You were right, Kresh said simply. At Arcturus Prime, when you told me that we had taught humanity to become something that predators fear. You were right. I have spent 3 months trying to make my superiors understand what I saw that day, what your ship is capable of. Some of them listened. Many did not. They believed that Arcturus was a fluke, that with proper tactics and sufficient numbers we can still defeat your forces. And you? Chen asked. What do you believe? Kresh's mandibles clicked, and what Chen had learned was the Valorian equivalent of a bitter laugh. I believe that humanity has done in 3 years what took my people 3,000 years to accomplish. You've taken your rage, your fear, your desperation, and you've forged it into something that the galaxy has never seen before. Not just in your ships, Captain, but in your philosophy of warfare. You don't fight to win territory or resources. You fight to survive, and that makes you infinitely more dangerous than any empire. Is there a point to this observation, Admiral? Chen asked, though he kept his tone respectful. There was something in Kresh's demeanor that suggested this wasn't simply the ramblings of a defeated enemy. The point, Kresh said, is that I am here to offer you the surrender of my task force. 70 ships, 35,000 Valorian personnel. We will withdraw from this system immediately. and I will personally deliver a message to the High Command recommending that they accept humanity's terms for peace. Chen felt his breath catch. This was unexpected. A complete surrender without a shot fired, offered by one of the Confederacy's most decorated admirals. It was either a genuine attempt at peace or the most sophisticated trap ever conceived. Why? Chen asked bluntly. Why surrender without fighting? You have 70 ships, Admiral. Even knowing what the Retribution can do, you could make this costly for us. You could take some of my crew with you before you fell. Why not try? Kresh was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke there was a profound sadness in his synthesized voice. Because I have seen too many of my people die already, Captain. Because I understand now that this war was a mistake from the beginning. The Confederacy saw humanity's rapid expansion as a threat, as arrogance that needed to be checked. We told ourselves we were teaching you a lesson about respecting your elders, about understanding your place in the galactic order. He paused, his alien features unreadable, but his body language conveying defeat. But the truth is simpler and more shameful. We were afraid. Afraid that humanity, with your adaptability and your drive, would eclipse us, that you would achieve in centuries what took us millennia, and rather than compete with you, trade with you, learn from you, we chose to try to destroy you. It was fear, Captain Chen. And fear made us into the very monsters we claimed you might become. Chen absorbed this, understanding the courage it took for Kresh to make such an admission. You're asking for terms, then? I'm asking for what you offered at Arcturus, safe passage for my ships and crew. In return, I will testify before the High Command about humanity's military capabilities. I will recommend in the strongest possible terms that we accept your peace proposals. I cannot guarantee they will listen, but I can promise you that I will try. Chen considered the offer. It was everything he could have hoped for: a bloodless victory, one less battle where thousands had to die. But there was a part of him, the part that still remembered the smoking ruins of Port Reliance and New Shanghai, that wanted to see those Valorian ships burn the way human ships had burned. He crushed that impulse ruthlessly. This was bigger than revenge. Agreed, Chen said. You and your ships will withdraw immediately. You'll leave behind all sensor logs and tactical data from your time in this system. And Admiral Kresh, I want your word as a warrior and a commander that you will genuinely advocate for peace, not just because humanity threatens you, but because it's the right thing to do. Kresh's mandibles clicked again, this time in what Chen thought might be respect. You have my word, Captain. And for what little it may be worth, you have my apology. For my part in this war, for the humans who died because of orders I gave or supported. I cannot undo what has been done, but I can at least acknowledge that it was wrong. Apology noted, Chen said quietly. And Admiral, for what it's worth, I take no pleasure in what happened at Arcturus Prime. Those 90,000 Valorians who died, they were following orders, doing their duty as they understood it. I don't hate them and I don't hate you. I just want this war to end. As do I, Captain. As do I. The Valorian task force withdrew from Kepler 442b within the hour, leaving behind relieved colonists and a wealth of intelligence data. But more importantly, they left behind hope. Hope that the war might actually end. That peace might be more than just a distant dream. True to his word, Admiral Kresh presented himself before the Valorian High Command and delivered a report that sent shockwaves through the Confederacy's leadership. He held nothing back, describing in clinical detail exactly what the Retribution had done to his fleet at Arcturus Prime. He presented sensor data, tactical analyses, casualty figures. And then he told them what Captain Chen had told him, that humanity was building more ships like the Retribution, and that the only thing preventing a retaliatory campaign into Valorian space was human restraint. We started this war believing humanity was weak, Kresh concluded his report. We were catastrophically wrong. And every day we continue this conflict, we give them more reason to become even stronger, more determined, more willing to do whatever it takes to ensure their survival. We have two choices before us: accept their terms for peace and begin the long process of reconciliation, or continue fighting until they have a fleet capable of reducing our homeworld to ash. I recommend we choose peace while it's still being offered. The High Command deliberated for 3 days. During that time, humanity held its breath, wondering if Kresh's testimony would be enough. The Retribution remained on station at Kepler 442b. a silent reminder of humanity's newfound power. 5 more ships of her class were now under construction, and the Valorians knew it. The balance of power was shifting with every passing day. On the 4th day, the Valorian High Command made their decision. Ambassador Liu Wei received the Valorian delegation in the neutral territory of Kalia, with Ambassador Tereth serving as mediator. The Valorians came with a formal proposal for peace, one that included most of humanity's demands: official recognition of human territorial claims, reparations for damaged colonies, and a non-aggression pact that would last for 50 years. What they didn't offer was the mutual defense pact humanity had requested. That, the Valorian chief negotiator explained, was a step too far for a proud species to accept so soon after defeat. But they were willing to discuss it as part of future negotiations, once trust had been rebuilt on both sides. Liu Wei consulted with Earth's leadership and accepted the terms. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was in diplomacy, but it was peace. Real, lasting peace, backed by humanity's demonstrated ability to defend itself and the Valorians' hard-learned lesson about the cost of aggression. The treaty was signed 3 weeks later, in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. Humans and Valorians stood side by side, their leaders putting their marks on a document that formally ended 3 years of devastating warfare. It was awkward and uncomfortable, and the wounds were still too fresh for any real warmth between the species, but it was peace nonetheless. Captain Marcus Chen watched the ceremony from the bridge of the Retribution, which remained on station above Arcturus Prime. The planet below was healing, its defenses rebuilt and strengthened. New construction was everywhere: schools, hospitals, agricultural centers, all the infrastructure of a thriving human colony that had come within hours of annihilation. "We did it," Commander Okonkwo said, watching the same broadcast. "The war's over. We actually won. We survived," Chen corrected gently. "There's a difference. Winning implies someone was keeping score, that there were prizes to be won. All we did was make the cost of fighting us too high to be worth paying." "Isn't that the definition of winning?" Okonkwo asked. Chen thought about that for a moment. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the definition of surviving long enough to find another way. War doesn't have winners, Sarah. It just has survivors and casualties. And we were lucky enough to be the former. He turned away from the view screen, looking at his crew, the men and women who had operated this massive ship with such skill and courage. They had been asked to become something humanity had never been before. A force so powerful that the mere threat of their deployment could end wars. They had carried that burden, and they had done it well. "The Vengeance will be operational in 2 weeks, Chen said. And the Defiance 3 weeks after that. Fleet Command wants to know if I'll take command of the squadron." "Will you?" Okonkwo asked. Chen looked back at the view screen where human and Valorian diplomats were shaking hands, or the equivalent thereof. "I don't know. Part of me wants to retire, to find a quiet colony somewhere and try to forget what we had to do to win this peace. But another part of me knows that someone has to command these ships, and that someone should be a person who understands the responsibility that comes with this kind of power. The burden of being dangerous," Okonkwo said quietly. "Exactly. We built these ships because we had to, because the alternative was extinction. But now that we have them, we have a responsibility to use them wisely, to be the kind of dangerous that protects rather than threatens, that deters aggression rather than committing it." He straightened his uniform, a gesture that was more habit than necessity. "Prepare the ship for departure. Once the treaty is officially ratified, we'll be reassigned to patrol the outer colonies. Fleet Command wants the Retribution visible, a reminder to any species thinking about testing humanity's resolve. A deterrent," Okonkwo observed. "The most effective weapon," Chen agreed, "is the one you never have to fire." 6 months after the treaty was signed, Admiral Marcus Chen, promoted from captain in recognition of his service, stood before a gathering of naval cadets at the Fleet Academy on Luna. They were young, these cadets, barely old enough to remember the darkest days of the war. They looked at him with admiration bordering on worship, seeing him as a hero, the man who had saved humanity with a single ship. He hated it. "You've all read the reports," Chen began, his voice carrying clearly through the lecture hall. "You know what the Retribution did at Arcturus Prime. You've seen the footage, studied the tactics, analyzed the battle from every angle. And I'm sure many of you dream of commanding ships like her, of being the one who stands between humanity and destruction. He paused, looking at their eager faces, so young, so confident, so naive about what they were asking for. Let me tell you what those reports don't show you. They don't show you what it feels like to watch 90,000 beings die because of orders you gave. They don't show you the nightmares, the second-guessing, the weight that settles on your soul when you realize you've become exactly what your enemies feared. The reports are clean, clinical, efficient. The reality is messy, traumatic, and haunting. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, some of their enthusiasm dimming. The retribution and ships like her are necessary, Chen continued. I won't lie to you about that. We live in a galaxy where strength matters, where the strong are respected and the weak are victimized. We built these ships because we had to, because the alternative was to watch our species be slowly ground down by enemies who saw us as inferior. And yes, they worked. We won the war, secured peace, established humanity as a power that cannot be casually threatened. He walked along the front row of cadets, making eye contact with each of them in turn. But every time we deploy one of these ships, every time we point their guns at a potential enemy, we have to remember what they represent. They represent humanity's willingness to do whatever it takes to survive, to kill if necessary, on a scale that staggers the imagination. That's a terrible responsibility, and it should weigh on you. The moment you start to enjoy that power, the moment you stop questioning whether there was another way, you've become the monster that justified building these weapons in the first place. A young cadet, barely 18 by Chen's estimate, raised her hand. Sir, are you saying we shouldn't have built the retribution? That we shouldn't have fought back? No, Chen shook his head firmly. I'm saying we should understand the cost of what we built, what we did, what we became. The Valorians attacked us because they feared what humanity might become, and in defending ourselves, we proved their fears justified. We became dangerous. We became something the galaxy fears. He returned to the front of the hall, his gaze sweeping across all the cadets. Your generation will inherit these ships, this power, this responsibility, and you'll have to decide what kind of dangerous humanity becomes. Will we be the kind of dangerous that protects the innocent and deters aggression? Or will we be the kind of dangerous that seeks out threats to eliminate, that strikes first and asks questions later? Will we use our power to build a better galaxy, or just to ensure our own dominance? The lecture hall was silent, the weight of his words settling over the young cadets like a heavy cloak. The battlefield did fall silent, Chen said, referencing the title of the countless news reports about Arcturus Prime. And humanity did stand victorious. But victory is just the beginning. What matters now is what we do with that victory, how we wield the power we've claimed. That's the real test. The one that will determine whether building ships like the Retribution was an act of desperate survival or the first step toward becoming the very tyranny we fought against. He let that thought linger, then straightened to attention. You're dismissed. Think about what I've said. And if you still want to command one of these ships after really considering the responsibility, then I'll be proud to serve alongside you. But if you're having doubts, if you're questioning whether you're ready for that burden, then good. That's exactly the kind of officer these ships need. 10 years later, the galaxy had changed in the decade since the Battle of Arcturus Prime. Humanity's rapid rise from victim to power had fundamentally altered the balance that had existed for centuries. But perhaps more significantly, it had forced every species to reconsider their assumptions about newcomers, about strength, and about the consequences of aggression. The Valorian Confederacy had undergone its own transformation. The old guard who had championed the war against humanity had been swept away, replaced by younger leaders who understood that the galaxy was changing and that adaptation was the price of survival. They maintained their pride, their culture, their traditions, but they tempered them with hard-won wisdom about the costs of underestimating others. Admiral Kresh, retired now and teaching military history at one of Valoria's most prestigious academies, included the Battle of Arcturus Prime in every course he taught. Not as a lesson in tactics or strategy, but as a case study in the dangers of arrogance, the importance of respecting potential enemies, and the fundamental truth that desperation makes innovators of us all. As for humanity, the feared fleet of 20 Retribution-class warships had been built, but they rarely left port except for training exercises and ceremonial deployments. They were a fleet in being, a deterrent force whose power lay not in its use but in its existence. The galaxy knew humanity could deploy overwhelming force if threatened, and that knowledge alone was usually sufficient to prevent conflicts before they began. Admiral Marcus Chen, now overseeing the entire human defense fleet, stood on the observation deck of Earth's primary orbital station, looking out at the planet that had birthed humanity and sent it to the stars. Behind him, his granddaughter, a cadet in her final year at the Fleet Academy, joined him at the viewport. "You're thinking about Arcturus Prime again?" she observed. It wasn't a question. "I think about it every day," Chen admitted, "even after all these years. It shaped everything that came after the peace, the treaties, humanity's position in the galactic community. All of it grew from that one battle. Do you regret it?" she asked. Chen considered the question carefully, as he always did. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the lives lost on both sides. But do I regret the decision to fight to defend our people? No. Given the same circumstances, I'd make the same choice. Though I hope every day that your generation never has to face similar circumstances." He turned to look at her, seeing in her young face the future of humanity's naval tradition. "You'll take command of your first ship in a few years. It might even be one of the Retribution-class vessels. If the predictions about your career trajectory are accurate." She nodded, understanding the weight of what that meant. "When you do," Chen continued, "remember what I told your class 10 years ago. The greatest victory is the battle you never have to fight. The strongest weapon is the one you never have to fire, and the truest measure of power is not how effectively you can destroy, but how wisely you choose not to." "The burden of being dangerous," she said, echoing Okonkwo's words from a decade before. "The burden," Chen agreed, "and the responsibility. Humanity stood victorious at Arcturus Prime, but we won something more valuable than a battle. We won the right to chart our own course, to be taken seriously, to have a voice in shaping the galaxy's future. What we do with that right, how we use our power, that's the legacy we're building." He gestured at the stars beyond the viewport, at the vast expanse of space where humanity had planted its flag and declared its refusal to be victimized. "Out there are species who fear us. There are species who respect us. And there are species who are watching to see what we become. We proved we can be dangerous. Now we have to prove we can be wise." The Retribution hung in orbit nearby, her massive hull gleaming in the reflected light of Earth. She was a monument to humanity's determination, a testament to what could be achieved when survival was at stake. But she was also a reminder of the prices paid, the lives lost, and the moral complexities of wielding such power. The battlefield had fallen silent. Humanity had stood victorious, and now came the harder part, building a peace worthy of the sacrifices made to win it, and ensuring that the power to destroy was always tempered by the wisdom to preserve. The future remained unwritten, but humanity would face it as they had faced the Valorian threat, with courage, determination, and the hard-earned understanding that true strength lay not in the capacity for violence, but in the judgment to know when that violence was truly necessary. And in the quiet moments, when Admiral Marcus Chen allowed himself to hope, he dreamed of a day when ships like the Retribution would be nothing more than museums, relics of a more violent time. A day when humanity's power would be measured not by the size of its guns but by the quality of its character, when the silence that fell over battlefields would be the eternal silence of weapons never fired, of wars never fought, of a galaxy that had finally learned the true cost of conflict and chosen a different path. Until that day came, the Retribution and her sisters would stand watch, sentinels guarding not just humanity, but the fragile peace they had won at such terrible cost, a reminder to the galaxy that humanity could be dangerous when threatened, but preferred to be something better, something wiser, something worthy of the stars they had claimed as their own.